Hello there, people of the internet. My name is Udwur Jagero, and this is Dialogues with Jagero. Today, I'm in the studio with Lawi, Sultan, Njerimani. I want to ask you a quick fire questions.
Go ahead.
And then you'll tell me yes or no.
Okay.
And then you can qualify your answers later on.
No problem.
Do you think that Africa is a failed continent?
Africa is not a failed continent.
Yeah. Do you think Kenya is a failed state?
Kenya is a progressive state, so no, it's not a failed state.
Do you think that South Africa is under colonialism?
Good question. Under colonialism, of the mind, yes. Right.
Yeah. Do you think that Zimbabwe did not take the opportunity to further themselves and be a first world?
They did further themselves. I'm 50-50 on that one. They did further themselves until they ran out of steam.
Do you think that Nelson Mandela was a patriotic was a patriot?
He was a patriot. I can't take that away from him. Right.
Do you think that Nelson Mandela gave a road deal to the people of South Africa at the point of taking over the country in 1994?
He compromised a lot of things, but did he give them a road deal? It was a good deal for the time.
Yeah.
It was not a futuristic deal.
Do you think that was better for South Sudan to remain in the larger Sudan?
Yes, it was better for them to remain in the larger Sudan. Reason is they would have diluted. I hope I'm at the point of qualifying.
Okay.
But they would have diluted the Arabic influence that is currently predominant in, I don't want to call it North Sudan, but the Sudan. But it would have diluted that influence, and they would have started looking at themselves as one people and trying to...
Yeah. Do you think that Kagame is a dictator?
Is Kagame a dictator? Is Kagame... People have called him a benevolent dictator. I will let history answer that one.
Yeah. Okay. Do you think that Jomo Kenyatta was a founding father for this country?
He was not a founding father of this country. He was one among many, including my grandfather, who was one of the founding fathers of this country. He was one among many. I wouldn't give him the credit that he was a founding father. Right.
Okay. The other question. These questions are many.
Sure.
Yeah. Who is the worst president that Kenya's ever had? Uhuru Kenyatta, William Ruto, what is his name? Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi, and Kenyatta.
Worst president. So we've had 4 presidents.
And I forgot to mention Mwai Kibaki.
We've had 4 presidents. So let me rank them.
Number 1?
Number 1 means the best, or number 1 means at the bottom?
Yes.
I want to rank them from the bottom.
Okay, please do.
So I want to rank them from the bottom. I would start with Moi at the bottom.
At the bottom, the worst?
Worst.
Okay.
We can't go lower than that. Let me put it that way.
Okay.
We can't go lower than that. Then I would come to who would be next. Kenyatta would certainly not be Jomo Kenyatta would certainly not be very far from that.
Okay.
So if number 4
so
is
rock
Moi,
bottom, we have Moi, and then
right.
and then his predecessor.
And then I put
Moi.
I put
Kenyatta.
I put Kenyatta, Jomo Kenyatta, and then I put. As much as this may be controversial, I would put Mwai Kibaki right after that.
Okay.
I don't know if I need to qualify or I'll get to the point of qualifying.
You can qualify.
I can qualify.
Immediately, yes.
So I put Mwai Kibaki there because Mwai Kibaki squandered the goodwill that was given by the people in 2002. You know, this is a debate I've had with a couple of friends. Many people say Kibaki gave us the best economy. My argument is, if Moi did the worst, we can't go lower than that. Then anyone else who came and showed a little effort we were likely to achieve something. So we cannot say that the good economics that we achieved with Mwai Kibaki was because of his economic genius. No, in my view, very humbly, this was a product of Moi taking us to the rock bottom, that there was nowhere else to go but up. A little effort and we start going up. So I didn't see Kibaki's economic genius.
What opportunities did he not squander?
What opportunities did he not squander?
Yeah, because then that would raise him up. You would then not put him at number 3.
I was still at the point of qualifying.
Okay.
Because I'm talking about the economics.
Yes.
I started by disqualifying the economics that people give him a lot of credit for.
Okay.
And now I'm going to what did he squander? The goodwill of the people. Remember in 2002, Kenya was at that point where we said zero tolerance to corruption. We want one united Kenya. Kenyans are looking at themselves as a tribeless nation. But then Kibaki gets in with a promise of a new constitution within the first 100 days. When did we get the constitution? Several thousand days later, in 2010, from 2002 or 2003 when he took over. And I'm saying the social fabric is what was given, or the social goodwill, or what I may call social capital, handed over to Kibaki. But he squandered the social capital. Economics, he tried to achieve a lot. We're saying that's the time the Nairobi Stock Exchange and all that were taking root. But the social fabric of the nation splintered effectively after 2002.
Okay.
Right.
And then who do you give number 4 to?
It comes down then to Kenyatta in his presidency. Controversially, he made it through. There was a lot of questions about the 54%. There was a lot of questions about the electronic systems in 2013 being used in his favor. Those will always be there. Those questions will always be there. And they still linger to date. They've never been answered. Until the day we get a definitive answer, we'll never know. The question of 54% will still be on people's minds. If we do ever get the answers, then we may say, okay, pass or fail. But then by default, because I've already ranked all the others, it happens that then Uhuru Kenyatta appears to be at the top.
Uhuru Kenyatta appears to be top. Why do you demote Uhuru Ruto? Why do you relegate him behind?
All right.
Yes.
So the reason I've not ranked Ruto is because he's still in the race. He's still running. He hasn't completed the race. It's like ranking who is the best 100-meter sprinter while he's still running.
Okay.
So until he completes his race is when you can now take stock of his period and say, what did he achieve? So I've not even ranked.
What is his stock after 2 years in presidency?
What is his stock after 2 years? If I was to give a rating on a scale of 1 to 100, I would say he's performing below 40%.
Okay.
And below 40% essentially means in a classroom, that's a fail. There's a lot of failure in the current government. And that failure, usually, you can't take credit for good things and not take credit and not take the responsibility for the failures. Okay. So if we are to talk about where the buck stops, effectively at his doorstep.
Let's go back to Africa.
Sure.
You said that Africa is not a failed continent, right?
Yes.
You live in Canada, correct?
Lived in Canada, now in Kenya.
Now in Kenya.
Right.
But how long have you lived in Canada?
2 years.
2 years.
Right.
Which is a substantial amount of time. Have you lived in any other country apart from Canada?
I've visited other countries, but I've not lived for a longer duration as I have in Canada. Right.
Do you think that the Zimbabwean president, what is his name? The other one.
Mnangagwa?
Mugabe.
Mugabe.
Was Robert Mugabe sabotaged by the West, or he sabotaged himself?
That's a good one, and I like that you've posed two perspectives. Number one, we must also understand or appreciate that there are those who do not see that anything good can come from Africa, especially when you step outside of this continent. Europe, go to North America, people always think Africa is behind us. Africa is not a place where anything good comes from. So if you're operating in that sphere and operating or engaging in discussions and dialogue with people from that sphere, there will always be that tendency to imagine that you have nothing to offer us. So Mugabe, being a doctor, highly intellectual, highly well-versed with what goes on in geopolitics, having been a leader of a guerrilla fight to oust the Europeans from his country, having had also the benefit of intelligence provided to him by security forces at the highest level as a president, was certainly a problem for the British, for Tony Blair. People who would say, how does this man pose a challenge to us when we are supposed to be the superpowers? That is the front side of it. So then there's the back side. Did he sabotage himself? Now, at times, with too much knowledge, with too much intellect, the possibility of becoming abrasive, the likelihood that you may start looking down upon other people, discounting their views, believing that you know what is best, is also high. And in that regard, then, after he had effectively fought and waded off the European powers, then he started becoming problematic on the home front, because the home front is where now you cannot fool your people. You can fool outsiders. Even in a homestead, you can fool guests. You can show them how nice and hospitable you are. But the people in your house know who you are. And that's ultimately usually the biggest challenge.
A lot of people have complained that one of the things why Africa has always remained a second fiddle to the West, you've talked about America, Canada, Australia, Europe. They claim that our land and our resources were taken. That is a very active complaint in South Africa right now.
Right.
It's the reason why the abrasiveness that you speak of about Zimbabwe and, people call him a dictator, the late, right? Mugabe. And look at Malawi, Namibia, which have swaths of land that is still in the hands of the white. We have lots of agricultural land still in the hands of the whites in South Africa. As a matter of fact, if I were to see whether South Africa is still under colonialism or they have, thrown away those chains, I would say they haven't thrown away those chains.
Right.
Do you think that we are not giving the real reason why we are still lagging behind? Is it that our land was actually taken? Okay. Do you think that, for example, right now, the South African opposition leader, what is his name? The young fiery guy.
That's Malema.
Malema.
Right.
Malema is claiming that so long as the land still belongs in the hands of the whites, that they will forever be in the gutter. And that was also the fight with that Mugabe had with the West. And he ultimately took land from them. And that was the beginning of his troubles, where they decided to sanction him, not to do business with him. So do you think that that is a huge part of the reason why? So the question is in two parts.
Sure.
The land that is still in the hands of the whites, that is giving them a lot of leverage, and then the endemic corruption in Africa. Which one is it that is making us lag behind?
All right. So let's begin with the land.
Okay.
Because the land is what everyone sees. And I'll use examples, say, from Kenya, and also I'll try and address the South African and Zimbabwe context.
Yeah.
So the South African context is very unique because you see the land they have historically, the people in South Africa used to have nomadic lifestyle. So they live in one place, and if you've seen the weather patterns, they have almost the kind of winters that are present in the northern hemisphere. It gets cold around June. So people certainly would migrate to other places, away from, say, the coastline and the likes. And you find that in some places like the Transvaal, the Vaal area, when it's wet, it's very green. Water flows, and the place you stand on the high tops and you can see the land looks lush. Then you get to some place in the season when it is extremely dry. It is likely then that this nomadic lifestyle dictates that you move to the lush areas when it's fertile, and you move away from it when it starts getting dry. That concept of ownership of an area was not existent. But the Europeans had developed ownership, the concept of land ownership, over the years from time immemorial. That's why they used to have the class system. You have the feudal, or the, what is the term that they used to use? The serfs.
Yeah.
The ones who are at the bottom, the ones who go to the farm, the ones who till and all that. And then you have the nobility. And then you have nobility aristocrats, and probably even at the top usually was the clergy. And then they say the king or the monarchy above everyone else, with the presumption that these are the people, or the royalty, ordained by God. So land ownership, European perspective, they had developed boundaries. From here to here is mine, from here to there is yours. But we hadn't developed that. In the South African context, then you find that nomadic lifestyle made their lands look like were inhabited. So the European lands there and says, we have not seen anyone in this area for so many months. So we start claiming this area. And then over time, the people who had migrated because of nomadic lifestyle start coming back to those areas and say, who are these here? And that's when you start getting the Boer wars, the Boers, the Zulus, the Anglo-Saxons and the Boers. They start fighting amongst each other, trying to claim that area or territory. Eventually then, you start seeing truces being signed by people called chiefs. These are the ones who represent the Africans, so we'll agree that their territory starts here, there, and ours here, this way. But you find that the Africans, even at that stage, had not understood what the value of owning this land means.
Yeah.
You start getting kings like the kings of Matebele land,
Yeah.
who say, I will give you this area for you to exploit. And Cecil Rhodes gets a huge chunk of land and says, we are now going to exploit this land and the minerals therein, because they know what the values of the minerals are. The Africans at that point have not. And progressively, that then comes into farming. Eventually, people discover farming is lucrative, farming is sustenance. So how do we get this land for farming to become ours? I'm still talking about the Southern Africa generally.
Yes.
In time then, colonialism sets in. And colonialism has already found certain templates to be working. Colonialism has set in and discovered we can demarcate certain territories of land and say, this is ours. And then progressively, the Africans are now starting to catch up. First, you have to catch up on the educational front. After you've caught up in the educational front, then you can now try and understand what does the land ordinance mean. After you've understood that, then you start understanding there's something called rights. Then after you've understood the rights, then you start understanding there's something called human rights. After that, so you're always on the back foot trying to catch up. By the time you've finally understood what it means to be a human being that has self-worth, the only way for you to assert your right then becomes through warfare, becomes through rebellion, resistance, and all other forms that eventually came in. So that is South Africa, generally, Zimbabwe, generally. And then we look at the Kenyan context and we say, how is it that then we have these same challenges regarding the land issue? And you find that the same template that was used by them is what is being used on us. I don't know if I've hit your point one way or other. Yes, you have. Generally.
Yes, you have. And I want to, the second part of it is how much corruption has contributed to our lagging behind as a continent.
Right. Corruption is a term that I find is used so generically that we fail to hit
the bullseye.
Exactly. So that anything we found to be amiss, we label it corruption. And then when you label it corruption, we do not have the prescription for it. We do not have the antidote that addresses that one in particular. And I'll cite this, but maybe this is the opportunity for me to say why then I coined the term McKenzian blueprint, and why I coined the term McKenzian corporatism, and why I coined the term McKenzian cartelization. I did that very specifically to say that we do not give the same prescription to some of these matters arising, and especially, as you pointed it out directly, corruption. My premise is this: at the root of every human interaction is the individual's impulsiveness. Individual impulsiveness has many composites to it. So at the root of my interaction with you, I bring with me my level of greed. I bring with me my level of jealousy. I bring with me my level of people call it attitude. Who are you? Am I more prominent than you? So that will determine how I treat you. I'll treat you as a lower person than I am, or I'll submit to you being a higher person than I am. That's what I call impulsiveness. And those interactions, you'll see them upon first meetings. Those interactions, you'll see them by observing 2 or 3 people interacting. You walk into a gate, the security guard will be telling you, where are you going to? Very harshly. You drive in your big Range Rover, mkubwa, with a salute. You're ushered in. They even don't know where you're going to. But just because you're in the bigger Range Rover, you're deemed to be a person of importance in society. And anyone else walking in with a school bag will be told, can you sign in there before you? So there's that. Those are the interactions I'm talking about. Now, with that foundation, then you go to the, I'm putting corruption here.
Yeah.
So I'm starting with the root.
Mm-hmm.
Having known that it's the interactions that determine how we eventually end up at corruption, then you start understanding the principle that my greed level, if it tells me if I'm not going to drive into that gate with a Range Rover, I will not get respect. I will be deemed to be a lower person. I must get that Range Rover. I want these people to respect me. So that Range Rover, I must get it. I've seen how Jagero is respected when he drives in. I want the same respect. My greed starts going up. My greed then tells me, for me to get that Range Rover, I must get the money. How do I get that money? What does Jagero do? I must find out what he does and try as much as possible and replicate what he does. And if I don't replicate what he does, I must find an alternative way to what he does. Jagero may be getting his money through doing a podcast, through writing, through all those. But I discover that I do not have the wherewithal to host a podcast. I do not have what it takes to write. I'm not talented intellectually to do any writing. So what do I start doing? I start looking for what are the weaknesses in the area that I am in. What are the weaknesses in the society that I'm in? And the weaknesses may be found in the absence of structures, the absence of systems that govern norms within that society. Essentially, I will try and find loopholes in this society so that if then it means I can go to Mombasa, get a motor vehicle because people want cars, and I can get a motor vehicle from Mombasa and sidestep the taxation and sell that car, collude with anyone who is involved in taxation to make sure I do not pay the required tax, sell it, make a profit, go back to Mombasa, buy 2 cars this time. I've already established a system that helps me get away from taxation. 2 cars, bring them to the market, sell them, no tax paid. Now I have money to buy 3 cars. Go to Mombasa, 3 cars. In Mombasa, they know me because they know this is a guy who comes and buys cars and he sells them. So now they even they extend credit to me. Remember the analogy I gave you? I walk in with my school bag. I'm not given respect. I drive in with a Range Rover, maximum respect. So in the same way, the guys in Mombasa will say, this is a guy who usually sells 3 cars every week. So we can even extend to him credit. So your credit is extended to you, and you now can purchase 6 cars at a time and pay later. All right? So we know you sell every week, so we'll give you 2 weeks to sell that car. You'll pay us. Since you're not paying any taxes, it's easy for you to achieve that. You sell them, you pay, you're given more, you sell them, and you keep growing, and that's how you. The next time Jagero drives in with a Range Rover, if your version is 2020, I drive in with my 2024. Even the security guards will look at me better than they looked at you. And that's how it breeds. So the greed has grown based on the weaknesses we have in society. And then the corruption then consequently follows that pattern. But as you can see in the analogy I've given you, the corruption started with greed. I was greedy. I was jealous. My level of greed was just suppressed because I was not in an environment where it could express itself. My jealousy was biting inside me, but I could not express it. It was just suppressed, waiting for the right opportune moment to say, now I have. You'll notice that from the day that I get my Range Rover 2024 and you have your Range Rover 2020, even now the balance of our relationship will start changing. Corruption breeds in that sense. The point I'm making is, for us to understand how corruption works at that high level, we must understand how it starts at the base level.
Preet.
I hope that you're enjoying this program. Over the last 15 years, I have been working online for clients in America, in Europe, and all over the world. And that is why it pains me a lot when I see a lot of African brothers and sisters saying that they do not have a job. Now, this is the problem. A lot of people are trying to look for a job in 2024 in their own town, in their own, in their local area. Now, the truth is, there are no jobs in Africa, at least not so many jobs. The good news is that we have internet these days. We have a tablet, we have a computer, we have a phone, and that means that we can do a lot of jobs, and those jobs are online. That is why over the last 4 years I've been writing a book that is called Digital Goldmine. It is a book that explains to you how you can earn money online. The 18 hustles that I've chosen are basically for Africans, because what happens when you are doing online jobs is that payment is usually a problem. So these 18 side hustles that I have put together in this book, you can be paid very well and very conveniently. Okay, so the book is only 1,000 Kenya shillings. That is about $10. You can buy it in Kenya using paybill number. You can buy it online from anywhere in the world using a credit or a debit card. All the information about this book is in the description below. And if you have a brother, you have a wife, you have a husband, you have a friend who is sitting at home and watching Netflix, please do buy this book for them. If you are the one sitting at home and watching Netflix and have nothing to do, please buy this book and your life is gonna change forever. Because I have been doing this online and I've been traveling and I've been enjoying myself and having a lot of fun. So thank you very much, and now back to programming.
People of the internet, that was Sultan, Lawi Sultan. I want to give him an opportunity right now to explain to us who he is, and then we are going to go into the meat of our conversation, which is the trouble with Kenya. I know people from around the continent and around the world that are watching this episode would think, why are we talking about Kenya? But when we talk about Kenya, we are actually picking a representative of Africa and dealing with it, because the British colonized Zimbabwe and they colonized Uganda and they colonized Kenya. And they colonized all over the world. Right? So I'll give you an opportunity to explain who you are. Okay. Tell me about the origin of that name of yours.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. So the origin of the name, or my names. So let me start. So Lawi Sultan Njerimani. I was born and then I was named Lawi Sultan Njerimani. So Njerimani is our family name. So Njerimani is a name that my grandfather was the first to hold. And I made inquiries about how that name came about. And I was told, this was relayed to me by one of my aunties, who is now deceased. But she said that my grandfather was involved in the Second World War. And during the Second World War, I believe he went to Burma. And I asked myself, so how did he... Okay, before I go there, so the basic premise is that Njerimani is derived from German. So Njerimani, German. So I asked myself, so how did he then become Njerimani? And someone said he went to Burma. But I know in the Burma campaign, the King's African Rifles did not meet with the Germans. And my question was, so at what point did he meet the Germans? And I was told, at least what I uncovered, is that ultimately the main protagonist or antagonist of that World War II was the German. So anyone who was fighting in that war, the mind was, we are fighting the Germans, we are fighting the Germans. The World War ends, he comes back to Kenya. They're given the national, let me call it national identity card, but at that time people were calling it Kipande. So the Kipande was your identifier. And that Kipande you required to have a registration. So the registration then says, the registrar then asked the question, can I have Simeon? Couldn't tell the other name properly. And someone looked at the name and says Malenya, and then he says, yes, Malenya, but which Malenya? Because, in a tribe, you're likely to have several people with the similar names.
Yes.
And someone shouted out, Njerimani, because he was the one that people knew within that locality who was involved in the campaign against the Germans. So for some reason, stroke of the pen, the person, the registrar wrote Njerimani, and that became his additional name, and he adopted it, and that became the family name. That's how Njerimani comes about. Lawi. In the Bible, there is a tribe of Jacob, the 12 sons. One of the sons was called Levi. To be a priest, you only had to come from the tribe of Levi. Zadok and all those, they came from the tribe of Levi. In Swahili, the book of Levi is called
Walawi.
There you go. So the name Lawi is derived from Walawi. Sultan. I made inquiries about that. And I have two versions to the name Sultan. Someone has whispered that Sultan, some of our ancestors were involved with the Sultan of Zanzibar historically. But when I asked further, I was told there was no, let me put it this way, there was no supporting evidence as to the connection. They were involved, the Sultan of Zanzibar, in which way? I couldn't get answers. So that's version 1. Version 2, which I found to be very anecdotal. Someone says, when the railway was being constructed, one of my ancestors was involved in the railway construction. They got to a place, and then people were given break to go home. And that place at that time was called Sultan Hamoud. So when he was going back to his village, the point of reference he was making as to where they had stopped was called Sultan Hamoud. And at that point, around that time, he was relaying stories and stories and stories. And when a child was born, he named that person Sultan. And eventually, progressively, male family members of that line have always had the name Sultan. As I said, anecdotal, but that is the history of those names.
It's very interesting, yeah.
All right.
That you're a student of history, a student of what happened in the past and what is likely to happen in the future. But also you deal with agronomy. Agronomy is the study of...
Agronomy, let me put it simply for those who will be watching this. Agronomy is plain agriculture. So agriculture, how do you grow things? How do you grow food? How do you grow plants? That is what simply agronomy would be about.
Yeah.
In my case then, I specialize in the agronomy of grass on sports fields, grass on golf courses. There's a whole science to it. It's not so much landscaping, but how do you make sure that that grass grows? Which species is it? Is it a warm season or cold season grass? Is it I don't want to go deep into science, but essentially, how resistant is it to certain soil types, certain climatic conditions? That is what my specialty would be about.
I don't see how this is tied to your love for history.
And marvelous.
Something happened?
Something happened. I was interested in golf at some point, and when I was interested in golf, then the journey took me into seeing what we see as grass on a golf course. How does it come about? Eventually, the love or interest of that side of golf then led me to want to venture into how do I understand how a golf course comes to being. If I wanted to construct a golf course, what would it take? So you learn about the architecture of a golf course. You learn about how the grass grows. The most predominant thing on a golf course is the grass. So if that is the most predominant thing, then how do I learn that component of grass, the various species of grass, and how to bring them about onto a golf course?
That's interesting. The trouble with Kenya I mean, do you consider yourself a patriot?
Yes, but I want to see where you're going.
Because I don't.
You don't. Patriots don't talk about their troubles. Patriots don't write about their troubles to the world. Is that where you're headed?
Yeah.
And I fully understand what you mean. So let me give you a background to the trouble with Kenya.
Okay.
I wanted to do a blog post sometime in 2020.
Okay.
This was a time when Kenya was just in the throes of COVID. So I wanted to take an analysis of not do an analysis, because that one means I was going deep. I wasn't going deep yet. I had just come across a book written by Chinua Achebe. And I was looking at that book and saying, it has 10 chapters. Of these 10 chapters, what are the comparisons between what he saw then in 1984 in Nigeria, and what are these 10 things as I saw them on face value, look exactly about what Kenya is going through at that time. You remember we had come off the controversial elections of 2017, sorry, my mind. So we had come off the controversial elections. Chief Justice Maraga had said, go back and do a proper elections that meets the transparency, accountability, aspects of a free and fair election. We got on to 2018. It looked like Kenya was headed towards a very perilous time. We started having the subjects of BBI bring people together. We started saying, let's have a conversation about how we can unite Kenya. But by 2020, things were still not looking good. By 2020, we had had the onset of COVID. We were at that place where people were being, could I say people were depressed. People are now in their homes at night as opposed to going to a bar at 5 o'clock and then going home at 10. People are at that point where they were saying, you could see easily that many have not learned to live with their family. Many are so used to being providers in their family. You come home, but you do not know how to relate to your kids if you're not bringing something, or if they're not asking for something. It was a point of inflection, if I may put it that way. And it is at that inflection point that I also started saying, what comparisons can I make? Do you want to know what the title of that book was?
Yeah. The blog.
Of the book, Chinua Achebe's book.
No.
The title of Chinua Achebe's book is The Trouble with Nigeria. So I read the book, The Trouble with Nigeria. It's about that thick. He wrote it in 1984. 83, released around 84.
How long was Nigeria an independent state by then?
So Nigeria, if I'm not wrong, attained its independence, was it in 1960? We could Google. But had gone through the first, the first prime minister was overthrown by the military. Was it the first prime minister or the first president was overthrown by the military? And they had a series of military leaders thereafter.
Yeah.
And after that...
1960, you're correct.
1960. So after all those successive coups, Chinua Achebe, do you know Chinua Achebe was an ambassador?
I didn't know.
All right. And Chinua Achebe was an ambassador of the place you've just mentioned before I interrupted you.
South Africa?
Biafra.
Chinua
Achebe was an ambassador of Biafra. Biafra was a breakaway region of Nigeria.
Yes.
Right? And Biafra had set itself up as a state. And that was a time now Nigeria had the civil war. Biafra had set itself up as an independent state. And Chinua Achebe was the ambassador of Biafra. And
To where?
was it to Nigeria? But he had an envoy status.
Okay.
Like he is a representative of Biafra too. I can't remember particularly or exactly where to, but he had the envoy status that he's a representative who can go in and negotiate diplomatically. So I'm not quick to say he was the ambassador of Biafra to the greater Nigeria, but he had envoy status. So he was effectively an ambassador. So his assessment, or when he was writing The Trouble with Nigeria, he was actually penning down his assessment of the Nigerian society. And he was saying in his book that he observed that when Murtala Mohammed took over as president, Murtala Mohammed was a general, he took over, there were no traffic jams that were usual in the mornings that had become the norm. Civil servants who are used to coming in whatever time they feel like were in their workstations at their desks by 7:30 in the morning. That is the kind of order Murtala Mohammed brought to that nation. And Chinua Achebe was lamenting that in his book, the trouble with Nigeria, as he saw it, was effectively the leadership. And this was 1983. Do you know who was the president in 1983?
Abiola?
In 1983,
No, Abiola was much later.
Muhammad Buhari. Buhari overthrew, I'm forgetting who they overthrew,
Yeah.
but by 1983, that was the first time he had become president. Of course, he was overthrown later.
By way of a coup.
By way of a coup. He was overthrown later. Did he overthrow?
Babangida?
Not Babangida. Babangida came after him.
Mm.
But Muhammad Buhari overthrew, I'm forgetting, but it's something we can always Google.
Yeah.
But he had taken over as president because of the state of things. There was a lot of indiscipline. And in fact, his deputy, whom I forget his name, was a brigadier general, introduced something called the war against indiscipline in Nigeria.
Yeah.
Did you find who it is yet that he overthrew?
It's not clear.
Okay.
Shehu Shagari.
Shagari, right?
Yes.
Shehu Shagari.
Yes.
He's the one. I think they were making an attempt to go back to civilian presidency, and discovered this civilian presidency was not working. So let the military come back, and Buhari came back. And one of the first things is that they said, we want to introduce discipline in Nigerian society. So you can imagine from the time Murtala Mohammed was president, by 1980 or 1982 thereabout, standards had gone back to what was not normal. And his deputy, Muhammad Buhari's deputy, who was a brigadier general, introduced something called the war against indiscipline. And what was this war against indiscipline? It meant that if a bus is coming here, you must line up to board that bus. What are the consequences of not doing that? You are taken and whipped on the pavement. And that was the policy. Until we restore discipline, we'll be beating people on the pavements until you align to order. So it was more of the military rule. That was an example of the military rule in Nigeria to restore order. So this is 1983 that Chinua Achebe is writing this book. And he says, the trouble with Nigeria is the leadership. And this was the time, and in fact, some people say, did his book inspire Muhammad Buhari's coup? because it was just around that time that he wrote that book that the coup took place. He gives that account. And I looked at that book and I say the 10 chapters. And I said, let me do a blog post of these 10 chapters with juxtapositions of Kenya. This was their chapter 1, leadership. How is it in Kenya? This was their chapter 2, society. This was chapter 3. I wanted to do that. But as I was digging through that and making comparisons with Kenya, then I started expanding the thought. As I told you, his book was that much, maybe 100 and something pages. You can see the thickness of my book. At the end of writing that book, I had to split it into 2 volumes. What you have is volume 1. There's a volume 2. So the book was going to be that thick, the size of a dictionary. And of course, I had to split it in 2 so that you can have volume 1 and volume 2. So that is my long-winded answer to the trouble with Kenya. And what inspired me to write The Trouble with Kenya, having borrowed from The Trouble with Nigeria by Chinua Achebe.
So the Chinua Achebe had 10 chapters, compacted into what is wrong with Nigeria.
Right. At that time in 1983.
1983.
Right.
The question that I want to ask you is, are those questions still valid? Are those answers still valid in Nigeria?
Are those questions still valid in Nigeria?
The points, the chapters.
The points. Very much so. Very much so. In fact, if you were to read The Trouble with Nigeria today, only that you will see the characters he's referring to in the book, Chief Awolowo and all the other luminaries of their time. They're not known today. But if you were to replace some of those names with names from current era, you will find in many instances the storyline will be the same. In fact, if you have never read that book and I picked new people today in their context and replaced their names with those new people, you might think this is what is still happening today.
Can I ask you a question before you go on?
Go ahead.
Would you replicate that book in Zimbabwe?
Would I replicate that book? At some point, I've toyed with the idea of having The Trouble with every country. The Trouble with America, The Trouble with Canada, The Trouble with Zimbabwe, The Trouble with South Africa. It is possible to borrow from my book and write the chapter for each of those countries, and you will find that you will have near similar problems, near similar challenges, because the template of how those problems come about or troubles come about is almost nearly the same.
Would you then say that because we have got democracies that more than 200 years old, like that of the United States, and you're saying that if we were to take that book and put it in the United States, then it will still ring through? The question then is that if people are saying that we have been undergoing civilization, then if we could talk about Nigeria then as saying that Nigeria has been undergoing civilization, and yet the trouble with Nigeria as of 1983 is still true. That is, I was born in 1982. That makes me 42 years old now. If Chinua Achebe wrote this thing in 1983, then we could assume that Chinua Achebe was thinking about this thing even for 10 years before he finally wrote this book. Then we could assume that the things that Chinua Achebe were talking about could date to 1973, so to speak. And so then if we are saying that the trouble with Nigeria for lack of a better year started as far down as 1973. Gosh, we can even go back to 1960.
Further. Right.
And
even further.
And even further.
Right. And I'll tell you why.
Yeah. So if we could go back that far, then we claim that we have been undergoing civilization. Then what then is this civilization that we speak of? Is it the skyscrapers? Is it the fact that we have a Boeing aeroplane? Is it the fact that we have got better lifts that are made in China? Is it that we've got a better lift that are made in Germany? Is it that we've got better phones made in California, designed in California and made in and manufactured in China? What then are we talking about?
Good one. So let me pick a starting point.
Yeah.
And my starting point is, let us start And the same question I ask of you, because at times when you ask the question locally, people are not able to contextualize. But when they see it, it's like the typical setting where you can point out the problems at your neighbor's house.
Yeah.
But when you look at your own house, you're not able to see those problems. It takes for someone, another eye coming in to say, hey, how comes you guys leave your shoes there, and how comes you don't have a shoe rack? You get my point?
Yes.
Someone will look at, an outsider will come out and see that.
Yeah.
But you, because this is your environment, you think this is the way things are.
Yes.
So, as I said, I'm picking a starting point. And the starting point I'm picking is, and you use the phone. So let me use the phone. The starting point I use, let me start with the phone. Then I go to Nigeria. Today, you have a phone. I can see you have a very swanky looking phone. What was your first ever phone?
iPhone 5.
iPhone 5 was your first ever phone?
Yeah.
Wow. You started way earlier.
iPhone 5.
You and Gen Z have no. I'll give you what my first ever phone was.
Yeah.
My first ever phone was a Nokia 5110. I still have it in my shelf. All I need to do is power it and it will come on.
Does it?
That's it. All it needs is power and it comes on.
There is no
first
button.
ever phone. In fact,
there is no power button.
Now, those phones, today you have a phone that it's a screen.
Yeah.
It's
a touch.
Your dial pad is touch. If you are to bring in someone who saw their first phone, let me not go too far back, but if you are to bring in someone who saw their first phone, mobile handset, in the year 2000, and they close their eyes to technology, and you bring them today, and you tell them this is a phone, they will be surprised that this is a phone. They will not even know where to start. What am I saying? Today's generation has leapfrogged technology. You're born today, your first ever phone is a touch screen. You have not gone through, in fact, when I started the mobile handset, the people will tell you, we had phones that you used to dial. In fact, dial comes from die. It's going round.
Oh, yeah?
Right, that's where dial comes from.
Dial the numbers 07
Dial the number,
168.
right. Not press the number, not touch the number. Dial. You get my point?
Yeah.
We started with the dial. So, and those were, in fact, technologically advanced days, because I'm told the Morse code was near equivalent to what a telephone would look like.
Yeah.
So, the point I'm making is, today's generation, you leapfrog technology. There are certain things you don't have to start. Your first phone does not have to be a 5110 like mine was, that you have to press up onto buttons for it to engage, that it has a dial pad. No, you have a screen. That's where your numbers will appear.
These days, you don't even need the screen to dial. You just say...
You speak into it, right, and it does the calling for you. So you've leapfrogged technology. The point I'm trying to make the connection here, that we have leapfrogged democracy. Today's generation does not have to start with the 1963 Constitution, which said rights of citizenry for the British include the following. For people who were born in the British territories are the following. That was contained in the 1963 Constitution. Our Constitution today, you start with, we the people. That was not contained in the 1963 Constitution. So we have leapfrogged democracy. Today you're born and you have certain rights that were not available to you during the colonial times. Leapfrogged democracy. The advantages of leapfrogging and their disadvantages. Leapfrogging means you run faster than others would have because you're more exposed to more information and things are more readily available to you. When you leapfrog, though, there are certain things you lose. You do not know how the things you're enjoying today came to be. You do not know the pains of getting tea ready. You know tea is brought in and you drink it and you enjoy it. But you don't know how the milk was produced. You do not know how the sugar was produced. You leapfrog that process.
Yeah.
Because of certain privilege that has been accorded to you.
Okay,
Right.
great. Thank you very much, people of the internet. Until another episode, bye for now.